Hello and welcome to another episode of Thick Slices and Deep Cuts. Tonight's episode is going to be one of these three-pack episodes. So I'll be covering three bands, in this case, three legendary death metal bands. I'm sure you know who they are by reading the title of this episode, but which bands I'll review in which order, you'll just have to see based on the concert shirt that I wear, because I saw all of these bands back in their heyday in concert, and I'll talk about that. These are also bands that are still going today. They've put out, I think one band's put out 12 albums, another band's put out 13, and I think the other band's put out like 15 or 16 albums. And while these bands are all classic and legendary, there's a certain point in their career that I know very well, and then I just kind of couldn't totally keep up with them over the years. I'm kind of aware of what their sound is like or what it's been, but I'm just going to focus on certain eras of these three bands. So we'll just get right into it, and it's October. I was trying to think of a Halloween theme for this one, but not really a Halloween theme to go with this, so I'll just, and I don't have any costumes, but I will wear the concert shirt, so I guess we'll do that to kind of throw a wrinkle in things. But and I'll do this cheesy segue that I've done in one other episode, but I'll do it here, so stay tuned, and we will be right back. Okay, and we're back. And the first band I'll be talking about tonight, and you can see the shirt here, is DEICIDE, just legendary, like satanic death metal out of Tampa, Florida, out of the Tampa scene. And the era I'll be talking about is pretty much the early era, mostly the Roadrunner Records era, and specifically their first three albums. So, and even more specifically, their first two albums. The first one, self-titled DEICIDE, from 1990. I had it on cassette way back in the day. Recorded in Morrisound Studios with Scott Burns, Glenn Benton, Steve, I guess it's Steve Ashheim, the drummer, who also writes a lot of the music. I think he played pretty good guitar. And at this point in their career, it was the Hoffman brothers, Brett and Eric. Just awesome band. I mean, it's hard to do the whole satanic thing effectively, but if anybody can do the satanic thing effectively, it is Glenn Benton and company. DEICIDE, they were just truly evil. I don't know if you can, this is from the follow-up album, 92, Legion, which was also recorded at Morrisound. At this point, you can see the upside-down cross indented in Glenn Benton's forehead. He's got the facial hair at that point. Scott Burns, producing 1992 at Morrisound, just getting more and more sophisticated. I used to have Once Upon the Cross, a physical copy, and for some stupid reason, way back in the day, I sold it. And now if you try to get it now, it's expensive, but I did find a copy for like 25 bucks used. And it had US dollars by it, so I bought it, but I didn't realize I bought it from someone in South Africa. So I bought it like 8 or 9 weeks ago, and it's still not here. So I used to have it, and I tried to get it here for the show, and I'll certainly put a picture up if it isn't already up. But Once Upon the Cross was their third album. There was like a 2 or 3 year gap between their first two albums and that album. And I like Once Upon the Cross, but the first two are my favorite. And I don't know which one's better, DEICIDE or Legion. This is like 1 and 1A. I mean, these two, to me, this is my go-to for DEICIDE. As the first two, they just sounded so evil. Certain kind of energy in those first two albums. I think by the third album, they have a really good production, good Morrisound production, but time has passed and the songs sound slow compared to DEICIDE is just a blitzingly fast band. And that album just feels slow, and I think I read that Steve Ashheim said that they had the song played at a certain speed, but when they got done with the album, it was only like 22 minutes long, so they had to go in and intentionally slow down all the songs to at least make the album more like 29 minutes. And my thought is, well, why not just write one more song and play them fast and maybe have a 25-minute album of 10 songs played at the right speed. Apparently, if you see them play these songs live, they play them at the faster pace, but one thing about DEICIDE is you don't want to hear DEICIDE play their heavy songs slower. Like the first two albums are great because they're just so blitzy, and everything's just fast. So Once Upon the Cross that was the last album I got into them with. again, it's a good album, but it's just not even close to the first two, in my opinion. Just because it sounds slower, because it was slower, because they had to intentionally slow it down to make a full album. I know they did Serpents of the Light after that, but I think that was 97, and that was just a weird time for all that kind of music. 97 was the dark age of death metal, and I think at that point I was just so entrenched in like 70s progressive rock. I found my dad's vinyl album collection and was just like just kind of into the whole prog rock thing in the late 90s, when all the death metal bands either changed or disbanded or went on hiatus or whatever. So I was aware of Serpents of the Light, but I don't know too much about it, and I've heard it enough to know that I don't like it as much as the first two, but I wouldn't say it's bad. I've read reviews that an album they did, it's not the one that I can't pronounce in 2000, but one they did in like 01 called In Torment in Hell is considered like one of the worst death metal albums ever, but I don't know, I haven't really heard it, but it gets pretty low marks. Then they switch over to Earache Records and do Scars of the Crucifix. I remember a video for that. That's the last one with the Hoffman brothers, and then Glenn, I guess, those guys are gone, and replaced by Ralph Santola and Jack Owen, formerly of Cannibal Corpse, and Ralph Santola, hired gun, hotshot guitar player, who I saw live with Chuck Schuldiner and Death on the Individual Thought Patterns tour. But I do, even though I prefer the early years of DEICIDE, I do have the Stench of Redemption from 06. You know, it's Glenn and Steve, the mainstays, but you've got Jack and Ralph there. And, I mean, what was the Desecration? Just Ralph's incredible, I guess it's neoclassical shredding, arpeggiated guitar stuff, but it's really cool. And it's kind of doing what the Hoffman brothers did, but by, you know, with far more skill and talent. But I did like this album. They did this lineup basically did a follow-up in 08. I think it's called Till Death Do Us Part. And I know they've done like 3 albums since that with other lineups, and I really haven't kept up with them more recently. But I did kind of pay attention when Ralph Santola and Jack Owen were in the band there. And I just thought this was cool because this was like kind of atmospheric, kind of moody. Some of the songs are, I mean, Desecration has this cool, slow, by their standards, a slow intro, but it's really cool. So I did get this, and like I said, Once Upon the Cross will be here any day. So basically I have 4 of the DEICIDE albums, but they have like 12 studio albums. I just cannot keep up with all of it. But I love the first 2 DEICIDE albums are just classic, definitely. You can hear Dead by Dawn. And I saw these guys live on the Legion tour, so they headlined at this place called Club 367. I think it was an old bowling alley. Probably held a few hundred people, but it was awesome. One of the most ruthless shows I've ever seen. So DEICIDE DEICIDE headline. Demolition Hammer opened. They were on the Epidemic of Violence album, and I forget the name of the first one. I can see the album cover. So they had their first 2 albums out. So Demolition Hammer was in their prime, playing their thrashy death metal. I think they're considered thrash. I don't know. They sounded like a death metal band to me, like a thrash death band. Then Cancer comes out and plays second. They're on the Death Shall Rise, and they had To the Gory End out at that point. So Cancer came out. They were ruthless. And then DEICIDE comes out, and they're just super ruthless. It might be the most ruthless show I've ever seen, because you just had Demolition Hammer, Cancer, and DEICIDE in a smaller club. I thought it was awesome. And I guess I didn't talk to Glenn Benton directly in the parking lot afterward, but I was in a crowd of people getting his autograph. I was kind of back then when you're a teenager, you're kind of afraid of these guys. But I remember he wasn't quite as scary. He just seemed kind of like irritated and grouchy. And that cross thing, indention in his forehead, is the real deal. He seemed kind of grumpy, but he was cool. He signed autographs. He seemed all right. And I remember one of the Hoffman brothers, whoever the blonde one is, I think he was on steroids, because I don't remember on the first DEICIDE album, I don't remember his arms being as big as they were at that show. His arms were like out to here, so I think he may have been on steroids or something. But anyway, awesome show. Probably the most ruthless show I can think of. And I've seen a few ruthless shows, but man, that lineup of Demolition Hammer at that point in their career, Cancer coming off Death Shall Rise, and DEICIDE coming off Legion was pretty awesome. But there you go. So that's shedding a little bit of light on DEICIDE. Again, perfect band for this 3-pack because I don't have vast knowledge of all 12 of their albums, but I certainly have a good deal of knowledge for their first 3 from their heyday, and also the Stench of Redemption as well. So they're definitely worthy of talking about, and they definitely have a few classic albums in their catalog. So, but there you go. So that is covering DEICIDE. So I will step away from that, and we will be right back. Okay, and we're back. For this segment, as you can see, I'll be discussing the early classic years of another legendary Floridian death metal band, Malevolent creation. I guess you could consider them Floridian. They actually originated in Buffalo, New York, and came down, I guess, to Fort Lauderdale area, so they weren't necessarily in Tampa, but they were a Floridian death metal band that also recorded in Morrisound Studios with Scott Burns, at least in the beginning, in the classic years. And as you can hear, for my money, the 10 Commandments came out in '91, death metal classic for me. We're hearing memorial arrangements. It'll go into Premature Burial, Remnants of Withered Decay, Multiple Stab Wounds, Thou Shalt Kill. Just so many classics on here. And then, as you can see, their follow-up in '92, also with Scott Burns. I think this one has Alex Marquez on drums. And Rob Barrett is now your second guitar player. But this was the first one I got, and then I backtracked and got the debut. So for me, much like with DEICIDE, those first 2 can't be topped. That's pretty much how I feel about Malevolent creation. Although I will say that they've put out 13 albums total. I pretty much kept up with their first 4. But I don't think there's anything shabby about the stuff they've been doing ever since. I think maybe in the later '90s they've tried some things stylistically, get a little more closer to like a grooving thing, but they sound pretty brutal still. So I think some of the newer fans, I've talked to people that are like, who cares about the early Malevolent? It's the stuff they've done in the last 15 years that's so aggressive and heavy, and it comes sonically through the speakers. And I don't discount that. I think a lot of music has to do with timing. And while I agree that the production quality and the things that you can do sonically with death metal now probably make these seem a little muffled, but you wouldn't have that stuff now without these original classics. And I just don't think you can beat these originals. And if the production qualities aren't great, that's great. I love death metal to be a little raw. And if it's a little quiet, turn it up some more. So for my money, you can't beat these. And then the Dan Seagrave artwork, Roadrunner Records, Scott Burns, Morrisound Studios, 91, 92. Then I got this. I never did get it on CD. Stillborn from '93. I think, I had Retribution from '92 on cassette originally. I never had 10 Commandments on tape. I could only find it on CD, so I got it on CD. I'm glad I did. But I got Stillborn from '93, so they put out their debut in '91, which we're hearing. Awesome album. Followed up in '92 with Retribution, equally awesome. Then in '93, on their final one on Roadrunner, they put out Stillborn. I don't even know where they recorded this. It's not in Morrisound, and it's not with Scott Burns or Jim Morris or Tom Morris. Produced by Mark Pinsky in Gainesville, Florida. I guess I've warmed up to this album a little bit over the years, but my initial thoughts were that the production was awful and it just killed these songs. I always lump this together with Suffocation's Breeding the Spawn. They both came out in '93 on Roadrunner, and you had a band that just came off awesome sounding albums in Morrisound with Scott Burns as your producer, and then they go elsewhere and they get this crappy production that kills the album. In the case of Suffocation, I think those songs are still good underneath it all. They've re-recorded a lot of them, so I think that still has good songs. And this one, I think, is the same way. I think it's maybe not quite as strong as the first 2, song-wise, but it's still got good stuff on it. Dominated Resurgency, Dominion of Terror, Geared for Gain. It's got good stuff on it. But again, much like Breeding the Spawn, this is their one that's just marred by a rough production. Brett Hoffman sounds not as good on it. But I think if you listen to it again and you get used to the production, you can at least hear what's going on with the guitars. But the guitars just don't sound as good. The drums sound way too clicky. It just sounds cheap. And so basically I was kind of off. I kind of got off the Malevolent bandwagon here. But somehow I stayed on the bandwagon for their fourth album from '95. So now they're on Pavement Music. So Roadrunner dropped. They're gone from Roadrunner. And they sacked Brett Hoffman as their vocalist. I'm like, what's going on? You're off of Roadrunner. You're not recording in Morrisound. You sacked Brett Hoffman. And I guess the bass player, Jason Blokowitz, was the vocalist for a bit. Man, I forget the name of the drummer. I think he ended up in Suffocation for a brief minute. But they have a killer drummer on here. Dave something or other. Anyway, Dave Colross. Anyway, I really was surprised that I dug this album. So it's a different label. It almost doesn't even sound like Malevolent Creation, other than there's a certain kind of aggressive energy that Malevolent Creation always has. Their albums are pretty high octane, and so this still maintained that, but obviously a completely different vocalist, a completely different sound. You get a different drummer who's got a lot of great skills. I mean, No Salvation Blood Brothers, Infernal Desire, They Breed, the title track. So this is really good too. But then I think after this they had Joe Black, and they went through a strange phase there in the back half of the 90s. I mean, I've said it before, but I think 1995 was about the last year of still getting some good quality classic death metal. I think by 96, I mean, you could say by 94 it was starting to change, but by 96 that was the beginning of the dark ages. 96, 97, 98, 99. Pretty tough going for these bands, but this was 95 and this is still cool. So I'm very familiar with their very first 4 albums, and I've heard like Envenomed and things they've done ever since. And I know I used to play in Tangle. I know Jeff from Tangle was a huge fan of Malevolent Creation. He likes a lot of their newer stuff. Sadly, we lost Brett Hoffman to cancer. I don't know if it's been a year, 2 years, something like that, maybe 3. But I always dug Malevolent Creation, especially in the early days, in the heyday, which was, the beginning of death metal to about the mid-90s. They were totally in the heart of it all. I saw them twice, because I forgot about the other time I saw them, but I saw them initially at the same club I saw DEICIDE at, but I saw them. They were the 4th of 4 bands. Well, there was a local band I like, Psychopath, that opened up. No, actually, I take that back. Psychopath opened up the night before. My band, before I was in it, Time Goal, opened the show. How could I not know that? Then it was Malevolent Creation, and they were coming in. Retribution had just dropped, so they were playing music from those first 2 albums. They were great. Then it was Cannibal Corpse. Tomb of the Mutilated was about to drop in like a week, so they weren't playing songs from Tomb of the Mutilated, so it was heavy on Butchered at Birth and Eaten Back to Life. That was cool, and they still had Bob Rousset on guitar. Apparently he wasn't good enough to hang with the band, but they seemed cool to me. I'm glad I got to see him with Bob Rousset in the band, so they were great. Chris Barnes doing his guttural thing, which was like a whole new thing at that time. And I think that was even before Ace Ventura came out. But that was in like August of '92. I swear Tomb of the Mutilated was about to hit like in another week. And then somehow Agnostic Front got the second billing. I'm not sure what they were doing on that bill. But then Obituary was headlining, and it was for the Incomplete. That was a pretty big crowd, because Obituary was on the rise at that point. That was probably the height of their popularity. But I saw Malevolent with Cannibal Corpse and Obituary in '92. It was awesome. And then later on in '95, I want to say, I saw them. It was that not many people showed up. It was '95, and it was this album. And Forbidden had put out an album called Distortion. So Forbidden, the thrash band from the Bay Area, who did Twisted into Form and Forbidden Evil. Well, 4 years have passed. They put out an album called Distortion. So Forbidden opens for Malevolent Creation. I thought it was a cool billing because I always liked. Before I got into before I knew what death metal was, I was loving thrash metal, and I always dug that Twisted Into Form album. So I got to see Forbidden and Malevolent Creation in front of like nobody, like 30 people, 50 people, something like that. But it was still cool. So I did see Malevolent Creation twice, including with this lineup for this album. So there you go. But that's a little run through. Again, perfect band to talk about for this 3-pack because they have 13 albums, and I really only know 4 of them. But I know the 4 of them well, and I have great memories of those albums, and these are definitely classics. And I know that the band is still going strong today. And I did get to see them back in the day a couple of times. So, but there you go. So that'll conclude this portion of the 3-pack. So we'll be right back for one more band. So we'll be right back in just one moment. And we're back. And as you can see by this shirt, it's time to talk about Cannibal Corpse. And as you can see by this logo, this is from back in the day. They've cleaned up their logo probably for the last 25 years to something else, but whenever I see this version of the logo, I get pretty excited because I know that's from the early era, the Chris Barnes era. So again, Cannibal Corpse, one of these bands that has, I think, 15 or 16 full-length studio albums. And I was into them heavily during the Barnes era, so those first 4 albums. I've definitely followed them since, so I'm familiar with a lot of their stuff, and I think Corpse Grinder is a hell of a vocalist. So there's nothing against the fact that Barnes is gone, and I'm sure Corpse Grinder is really the better vocalist, but I like what Chris Barnes was doing at that point in time, and it was the heyday of death metal. You know, Hammer Smash Face we're listening to. So I think, Eaten Back to Life comes out in 1990, so this band is sort of a Tampa band, but at this point they're still in Buffalo. But they're coming down to Morrisound Studios to record with Scott Burns, 1990, so this is pretty early in the death metal ballgame. And Chris doesn't have his guttural vocals yet, and these songs are kind of all over the place. Like, they're kind of short, they're kind of punky and thrashy, but it's definitely death metal. Some of the songs are like under 2 minutes, some are 2 minutes. So I always like this album. It has a charm to it. You know, this is the era with Bob Rousset. You know, Alex Webster and Paul Mazurkowitz, the drummer, and Alex Webster, the guitar player, they're the mainstays. They've been here since day one. Chris Barnes was there in the beginning. You got Bob Rousset on the other guitar, and Jack Owen on the other guitar. Eventually Jack would leave and go to DEICIDE. What a resume there. Chris Barnes would eventually go on to 6 Feet Under, which I think I used to have the very first album. I thought was okay. I think Alan West of Obituary was on that. But anyway, so this is a promising debut. I've always liked it. I've got a soft spot for that. This might be the first thing I heard from them, Butchered at Birth. So he's got the guttural vocals. I thought this was one of the heaviest things going. Meat Hook Sodomy, Gutted. I think next we're going to hear Vomit the Soul. It's got a guest vocal appearance by Glenn Benton. He's doing his DEICIDE thing with Chris Barnes' guttural thing. I thought it was it's still to this day one of the sickest death metal songs. And it's 1991, Morrisound Studios, Scott Burns. Metal Blade Records for these guys, but just classic. And I've heard a lot of people talk about how they hate the production for this, but again, I think that the rawness and the fact that everything's like super saturated and I think it only adds to classic death metal. I don't like super polished. I don't want Cannibal Corpse to be too super polished. So for me, this sounds great. This is, man, I don't know. And of course, you get Tomb of the Mutilated. Look at that cover. Look at that cover. Is this Wes Benscoter? That's what Benscoter was doing. This is where they definitely step it up musically, like their skills. You can suddenly you're like, on the first 2 albums, you didn't know that Alex Webster was this insanely awesome bass player, but by Tomb of the Mutilated, you're like, okay, Alex Webster's incredible. The songwriting just gets more and more complicated. In fact, this is the last album with Bob Rousset. I think in the studio, I think Scott Burns was telling like Jack Owen, like, you're going to have to do his parts. He's too sloppy. You can't do it. So I think in the studio, a lot of Bob's parts ended up being recorded by Jack. And but I love this album. I don't know. It's a tie between these two for me. It's which one's the best. I think this is the better album. I love this album, even though the production's just sick. Here's that production. Here's Bomb of the Soul. Oh, love it. Then they come out with, and I have the censored cover, but I have the actual cover on this shirt with the classic logo. Then they come out with The Bleeding, their last one with Chris Barnes. This comes out in early '94. You've got Rob Barrett, who was in Malevolent Creation. Small world. Jack Owen goes to DEICIDE eventually, but at this point, Rob Barrett comes over from Malevolent Creation, and this is a heck of an album. I remember at the time being a little disappointed because the production got even more clean, and I didn't really want Cannibal Corpse to be polished. But I mean, this might be one of their best albums too. I mean, I always love the Pickaxe Murders. Listen to these titles: Staring Through the Eyes of the Dead, Stripped, Raped, and Strangled, Struck with a Knife. You know, The Bleeding, the song is good, Pulverized. So this is a killer album. And so then you get to 1996, and again, 1996, the beginning of the dark times for all this music. And you look up, and I think the internet was going, but I didn't know. The album comes out, and you're like, what do you mean Chris Barnes isn't their vocalist anymore? So you got George Corpse Grinder Fisher, you got Corpse Grinder coming over from Monstrosity, and he does he's good, but he's not Chris Barnes, so you're kind of bummed, but he is a good vocalist. But I remember not liking the album Vile at all. Like, it was just like, and to this day, I feel like that might be their weakest album. Again, not Corpse Grinder's fault. For whatever reason, the production's not the greatest, and I've listened to all the Cannibal Corpse albums to varying degrees, not just the Chris Barnes era, and I still think to this day Vile might be my least favorite, or the least memorable. And so that kind of turned me off, and at that point I was kind of done with Cannibal Corpse for a while. It was 1996, not a good time for this music. Bands were breaking up, disbanding, changing, and I was just kind of moving into, like I said, 70s prog rock or whatever at that point. And so I kind of just stopped following them for a while, and then even when I got back into them, I wasn't really buying anything. I think it was when Jamie Jocelyn started hosting Headbangers Ball again, and they would show videos from like the album Kill and Evisceration Plague and stuff like that, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. And everything they put out, Red Before Black, the one that just came out, it's got kind of the greenish background. It's all good stuff. And then if you go back further, I forget the name of the song, but whatever album they released in '04, it's a super technical song. They have a video of it, of Pat O'Brien and Alex Webster playing these incredibly, insanely technical riffs from some song with a long, weird title from an '04 album. So, you know, and I know they did some albums at the end of the 90s that I think were considered pretty good. I think Jack Owen is still on those. And I think Rob Barrett, I forget how long he stuck around, but Rob Barrett stepped away. Rob was also in Solstice. I really dig that first Solstice album. But he stepped away at some point, and I know Pat O'Brien came in, and then when Jack left, at some point, Rob came back, and then obviously Pat's had some personal issues, and now they have Eric Rutan, who apparently was producing their last album or two, or at least he produced this one, this most recent one. Now he's in the band. That's a pretty good replacement. Get a guy from Morbid Angel. Let's see. Oh, I mentioned it in the previous thing with Malevolent Creation, but saw them right before Tomb of the Mutilated dropped with Bob Rousset on vocals. Malevolent Creation was the first band. Obituary was the headliner. And I don't recall them playing anything from Tomb of the Mutilated. So it was heavy on Butchered at Birth and Eaten Back to Life. And it was pre-Ace Ventura. But it was an awesome show. Just left an impression. And then I saw them for this tour for The Bleeding with Rob Barrett on vocals. I talked to Chris Barnes. I talked to Alex Webster. He had gone, I used to briefly work at a place called Crate, St. Louis Music Crate Amplifiers, Ampeg. And he had taken a tour there, and he was all about the music and the gear. And I talked to Chris Barnes briefly, and he was really mellowed, and he just asked me if I had any weed. And I was so young, I was like, I don't know, what? And but I saw. Man, I could be wrong on this. I want to say Sinister, the Dutch band, was the opener. I know Cynic was on that tour with the album Focus, because I talked to Paul Masvidal and Jason Goebel. Super nice guys, super short too. Super short guys. But I remember seeing Cynic because I love that Focus album. They were doing something completely different. But you know what? It didn't come across live. That was a bad setup for them. Going in between two brutal bands, and especially going right before Cannibal Corpse, it's not where you want to be if you're Cynic. That's a tough way to go. And they had a woman playing keyboards and trying to do the growls, but she didn't sound good doing the death growl. But it was still cool to see Cynic. I bought a Cynic shirt that night too. I got this one there. So I saw Cannibal Corpse twice back in the Barnes era. Once with Bob Rousset, right before Tomb of the Mutilated hit, and then once on the Bleeding tour with Rob Barrett after they were on Ace Ventura. So that was pretty cool. So I have fond memories of this particular logo in the Chris Barnes era. I mean, I think Chris Barnes that was the best thing for Chris Barnes. He's not really done anything I'm too excited about since he left Cannibal Corpse. And I don't know if Cannibal Corpse has done anything, in my opinion, that's as great as this. Although the guys on Thralls of Metal were ranking the albums, and they certainly like some of the more modern stuff. You know, I think Tomb of the Mutilated was way up there in the Bleeding. But I mean, I love Butcher at Birth, and I think they had this one ranked pretty low. They didn't like it, they didn't like the production, but I think it's an absolute classic. Again, 91, Morrisound Studios, Scott Burns. Anyway, a Buffalo band that relocated to Florida, to Tampa, just like Malevolent Creation was originally from Buffalo, and they relocated to Florida. So there you go. That's covering Cannibal Corpse as well. So there you go. That's covering 3 classic bands. Again, perfect band for this 3-pack review, because they've got 15 or 16 albums. I know 4 of them well. I know what they've been up to since, but I really just focus on that early era of the band. But so there you go. That's covering 3 classic death metal bands that I saw back in the day live: DEICIDE, Malevolent Creation, and Cannibal Corpse. So I think that'll almost do it. I'll come back with a little quick final thought or whatever in just one moment. Thank you for watching this segment. Okay. Thank you for watching this episode. I hope that was pretty enjoyable and not too terribly cheesy with the snapping finger segues and everything. But again, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.